Okay, here we go. Over 100 years ago, color in films was merely a dream, but now it's almost standard. And over the years, filmmakers have used color in some magnificent ways to tell their stories. But some were very reluctant to use it, to say the least.
Good evening. I've been examining the fingerprints on the inside of your television screen.
Hitchcock for the longest time refused to use color in his film simply because he thought his stories really didn't need it. And if you do look at some of his early films, he's kind of right. But when he started using color in his first film, Rope, you could see over the time when he made more color films that he started to develop his own palette, per se. And he didn't just put in colors that just for the hell of it. Every color he put in had some meaning to it. And it was really creative and intriguing how he uses colors. And in my opinion, two of his films that use color really well are Rope and Vertigo. Released in 1948 as his first ever film to use Technicolor, Hitchcock's Rope is based off a 1929 play called Rope's End, and it's about two men who think they can get away with the most perfect murder. And the reason why Hitchcock uses color in this is because of, quote, to denote the change in time of day from sunset to darkness, which is of vital dramatic importance to the story. I can hear him saying it right now.
Good evening.
We'll get to why the time of day is important in the story, but first I want to talk about our characters. Brandon, Philip, and David. In the opening scene, we see Brandon and Philip strangling their friend David. And if we look carefully, David is wearing a white rose. Hi, Future Rob here. That is not a rose, that's a pocket square. But my point still stands for this future argument. Continue. Now, I did some research online to see what the psychological meaning of colors were. And on liveyourmessage.com, they have a whole website of what colors mean and their positive and negatives. And if we look at white, it means like purity and cleanliness and innocence. And to me, I feel like the white perfectly describes David as innocent because he is an innocent person caught in a game of hide the body and try not to get caught, which it's the worst kind of game you could play. Now, if we look at our two antagonists, Brandon and Philip, we see they're wearing two very different colored suits that stand out to the rest of the monotone colored apartment. We have Brandon wearing a darker blue suit, and then we have Philip wearing a more purple, lighter suit, which I also just realized that if you take the first letters of their names, it represents the colors of what they're wearing. That's definitely not done on purpose. So if we go back to the charts that we found online and we go to the color blue and we look at the negative score, because obviously Brandon and Phil were antagonists, if we look at the blue first, we can see one of the words that describes Brandon is coldness, which definitely makes sense because he is a cold, dark-headed person who has this twisted mind of thinking he can get away with the perfect murder, and he uses his friend as a perfect example of that. But if we shift over and look at the positives, we could see that some of them are stability and calmness, which definitely also describes Brandon perfectly because throughout the whole situation, he's very calm and collective, acting like nothing is happening and nothing is wrong, it's just an average party. As for Philip, though, he is not really calm per se, which kind of makes sense because if you look at color wheels, you can see that purple can be split between warm colors and cold colors, which makes sense because Philip is trying to be cool and collective, but he is constantly on edge thinking that he's gonna get caught.
Because one of the subjects for our dinner table suddenly rebelled. Like Lazarus, he rose...
That's a lie!
And if we go back to the website again and we look at purple, two of the colors that describe purple would be arrogance and frustration, which describes Phil's actions perfectly as he almost blows Brandon his cover several times throughout the film.
Oh, I didn't mean I hadn't killed any chickens.
That's what you said.
Well, I didn't think it was a suitable topic of conversation while we were eating.
You could have said that.
All right, I didn't.
We're not eating now, Philip. What'd you lie to me for?
Because I don't like to talk about...
About what?
I can't play with that thing.
Well, doing my research, I found a Twitter argument that, not Twitter, Tumblr, completely two different websites. I found a Tumblr argument that said how the person made the argument that there is a warm and cool contrast between the two, which I'm on board with that idea, because Brandon is very cool-headed about the situation and is very collective, while Phil, on the other hand, is very reckless, and he is just full of energy because he thinks everyone already knows and he's gonna get caught. So I would say that's a pretty good connection to make right there. Now, let's step away from clothing and let's look at the whole scene. If we look at the whole apartment, it's very monotone and everything really blends in, except for one thing. Those two green chairs sitting in front of the piano that the stack of books tied with a rope were placed on. When I was watching this film for the first time, those chairs stood out to me because they were so bright and it just didn't fit the scene. And when we go to the scene where Philip sees the stack of books tied with the rope and Rupert starts looking at it as well, to me that's kind of a sign that Rupert realizes that there's like some form of mystery with either the books or the rope, but he doesn't really have an idea yet of what it is, and Rupert's got to get to the bottom of it. In the last about third of the film, when Rupert goes back up to the apartment, I'm leaving at least a couple bloopers in. When Rupert goes back to the apartment and he starts putting the pieces together, we realize that time has passed significantly and the sun is down and the night sky is out, and then we see the billboards in the background starting to light up in two colors of green and red. Which, going back to the thing about the whole time of day, to me I feel like the time of day going into night kind of represents how Brandon and Philip are going into a dark place of hell, or even being locked up per se. Because especially if you look at the background of the windows, the way the windows are set up, it kind of looks like bars, so I guess you could say it looks like a prison. That's how I'm looking at it, at least. Again, I'm not an expert, don't take everything I say with a grain of salt. But going back to the billboards in the background, we can see that the neon signs are red and green, the green representing the mystery, and the red representing the blood on the hands of the two men, and how that when you put the colors together, it shows that the truth is about to come out, because as time goes on, more and more of these colors start appearing in the background until Rupert takes out the rope and the camera pans to the profile of Brandon and Phil, and that neon sign outside the apartment is flashing three colors: red, green, and white. With the red and green combination meaning that they did something and it's about to come out, and the white meaning that David was involved and represents the innocence of David. And then when Rupert goes at the very last few seconds, when he sits down in the chair next to the chest, he sits in a green chair, finally putting the hammer down per se, saying that the case has been solved. Color is a huge part of Vertigo. We see the first color being shown in the intro credits, which is red, and red is a very prominent color throughout the entire film. We see it in Gavin Elster's office, we see it at Ernie's restaurants where we're introduced to Madeline wearing the green, which we'll get to the green in a minute. Hell, we even see Scotty wearing a red tie when he's chasing the criminal on the rooftops of San Francisco. Which to me, the red tie, I feel like, symbolizes his start of his vertigo symptoms. I guess that's how you describe it. His beginning of realizing he has vertigo. There you go. Because red we see is not only, I would say, describes his vertigo, but I feel like it just describes falling in general. Because we see red used in instances where Scotty is falling for something, whether that's nearly falling off a rooftop, or when he's in Gavin Elster's office and he's falling for the trap that Gavin is setting, or we see it on the red robe that Madeline is wearing as a sign that he is falling for her. Even the first time when Scotty is following Madeline, he wears a darker red suit, which means he's slowly not only falling for the trap, but he's also slowly falling in love with Madeline, because the red is so darker, it shows a progression per se of that love, and the red is really bright when we see the red robe on Madeline in the apartment scene. And we also see red in the dream sequence that Scotty's having, and to me it kind of symbolizes, you know, sometimes when you sleep and you feel like you're falling for a second, you bounce on your bed like, what the hell was that? I feel like he's having one of those feelings in his dream where he's just constantly falling. That's to me what I feel like it symbolizes. Now, let's step away from the red and let's go to the green. The green, which if we look back at Rope, would represent deception and mystery, which, if you watch the film, it makes sense. When Scotty is following Madeline, there's a lot of green around her. First, the green dress at the restaurant at Ernie's. We see Madeline get into a green Jaguar Mark 8, which, by the way, when they were remastering the film, they actually got in contact with Jaguar to find the exact green that they used for filming, and I just think that's pretty cool, especially for a car guy. We see a dark green at the hotel that Madeline goes to visit when she's in her trance, I guess, or possessed, I guess. And then we also see green when Scotty follows her to the museum, and the green grass is partially shadowed, but some of it's also in the sun, which to me I feel like symbolizes that we're slowly getting to the truth of Madeline and that not all of the mystery has come out yet. And going back to the dream sequence, we see green flashing in the leaves falling, and also too, just as the overall dream, we see flashing green. And to me, I feel like this is a transition point from green representing the mystery of Madeline to representing Madeline as a whole. Because in the later half of the movie, we see that green represents how much he misses her, from the green dress that Judy wears to the green hotel that Judy lives in. To me, that just shows that Madeline is, or green is the definition of Madeline. Now, going back to the first scene when Scotty and the police officer are chasing the criminal across the rooftops, we see that there is a blue hue, which, if I had to guess, was to emphasize nighttime. And in a video I found, someone made the argument that blue represents the guilt that Scotty has, which I can kind of see. The guilt started in that opening sequence with the blue hue to represent the night, and then we see Scotty wear blue when Madeline falls off the roof of the mission, and then we see blue when he's wearing the suit in that makeshift courtroom scene. We see him wearing the blue when he's in the mental hospital, when he's in that shock, and then we see the blue hue again when Scotty and Judy visit the mission again, and there's that blue hue bag, which to me foreshadows that something is going to happen here again, just like it did before. To me, I feel like color is taken for granted today. Not just the color palette of a film that give the overall feel or the vibe. I just don't see it being used like it used to be in like a film of like Rope or Vertigo, but I also haven't watched enough films to know that, so don't listen to me and take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'll also get back to you on that when I watch more movies. But seeing how Hitchcock went from refusing to use color to all of a sudden creating his own color palette, it's really interesting to see how he takes such minute details and makes such a big deal out of them and make them such importance to the story. Whether that's what a person is wearing, what color the cars are driving, what the color of a chair is, or some object that they're holding. Everything that Hitchcock can take advantage of, he makes the color have some meaning. And I find that really intriguing, again, coming from someone who refused to use color in the first place. So, I'm going to have to definitely watch some of his other colored films that I haven't seen. And overall, I would say Hitchcock had one hell of a color palette.
Good evening.